So welcome everyone who's here. This is Caitlin Saposi-Belknap with Move to Amend National and Democracy Unlimited in Eureka, California. And I want to introduce the presenters today, Richard Hobbs from Santa Clara Move to Amend, which is a little bit south of me in California, and Steve Justino, who's also on the Move to Amend Executive Committee with me and coordinator at Move to Amend Denver. Both attorneys are going to be doing the presentation today, and we just wanted to have an opportunity to begin to have this conversation. I know that it's happened in some other places as well. We've been, there's a session in each one of the convergences that we've done so far, and we'll continue to do. We have 4 more scheduled through the year. So there's a session on this, and actually this presentation that Richard prepared for the Oakland convergence that we just had a couple of weeks ago was so well done that we snagged him to lead this today. And Ben Nancy may be joining us. I don't see him here right now, so we're going to go ahead and start without him. Before you start, Richard, I'm just going to tell folks a couple things about the way the webinar works for anyone who's new. On the left, you can see who's here. And for questions, we're going to keep the sound off because this conference call line doesn't allow us to mute and unmute people. And so with dozens of folks, there's a lot of oftentimes background noise and all that. So rather than asking your questions, you can chat your questions at the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side. And we will be able to see them, and I'll field them for Richard and for Steve. And Richard's going to have to hop in a car after the presentation, and he'll stay with us on his cell phone, I'm sure hands-free, and then go to another meeting. So Steve will help with the questions at that point. So if you have any serious technical difficulties, you can try the support service. They are actually pretty responsive. And you can also chat to your questions, and I will do my best to help you out. But do know that this is recorded, so sometimes people, if you don't have a fast enough internet connection, sometimes there are issues, and sometimes just technology doesn't work the way we want it to. So this is recorded, the slides will be available, and the sound will be available in a presentation on the website that'll be out Friday. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, Steve first, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll turn it over to Richard?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me, Caitlin?
Yes.
Okay, this is Steve Justino from Move to Amend Denver. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and participating in the webinar today.
Great. And then, Richard, you want to say anything else about yourself?
Well, I'm Richard Hobbs, live in San Jose, California, and I'm coming at today's webinar from kind of 3 hats. First of all, I am an attorney, an immigration attorney. I am the coordinator of Santa Clara County Move to Amend, and for the last 10 years I've been executive director of a nonprofit called Human Agenda, and so we will be using some of the material from Human Agenda for this workshop today.
Great. All right. Well, then, take it away.
All right. In terms of an overview, we're going to take this opportunity today to dialogue and engage around what a vision for a better society would look like and what constitutional rights should be enshrined in the United States Constitution. And in order to do that, we're going to be looking at human needs and human rights, also our responsibilities as individuals to attain those rights, also what a vision would look like incorporating comprehensive human needs and rights, what human and constitutional rights should be codified in the United States Constitution, and we'll also engage in the discussion around rights or privileges under the Constitution. Next. But before I begin, I want to just talk about the tough times we're in. People talk about American exceptionalism, in my mind, this is what American exceptionalism is all about. Out of the 28 industrialized nations on Earth, the United States has the highest inequality, the lowest taxes, the greatest border inequality, the biggest military budget, the most military bases, the most expensive elections. Next. Also has the longest hours of work of any of the 28 industrial countries. No real health care for all, no paid family leave, no employer-required sick leave, and no employer-required vacation time. So we really are an anomaly as a nation. In terms of corporate personhood and posing an alternative vision for the United States, I think it's really important to take into mind that when most people consider vision, they strive to create economic, political, and social institutions that meet our basic human needs in order for us to be as happy as we can on a healthy planet. Next. We should be concerned about vision because if we don't have a vision, that's where we're going to wind up confused. If we don't know where we're going, that's where we'll wind up. We'll be confused. A roadmap can help orient our society, our community, our overall lives, and our daily actions. So to begin with an understanding of human needs, human rights, and constitutional rights, one of the things that we've done in Human Agenda is to identify human needs, and we've done that by asking over 50 diverse groups, including groups in Thailand and Mexico and children in the United States, 2 questions. First of all, what does it take for an individual, like a Robinson Crusoe, to survive and thrive? And secondly, what does it take for a society or a community to reproduce itself? After those 50 workshops, basically all 50 groups agreed that in terms of our individual needs, we have both physiological and psychological needs. Physiological includes, of course, water, air, food, protection or security of the organism, elimination, rest and activity, and sexual and sensual needs. And in terms of our psychological needs, we have the need for a love ethic, as espoused by Bell Hooks, for example, of a caring, commitment, trust, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. We also need emotional security, / spirituality, connection, a sense of purpose, and we need time alone or privacy and outlets of emotional release. So these are these psychological needs sometimes are a little bit amorphous, but I think the important thing here is a sense of connectedness. When we incorporate individual needs into our social needs, these are the 5 key areas that have been identified that are necessary to have more unalienated, full, productive, and caring lives. So first of all, there are 5 different categories. First of all is the importance of care work, that we need to be able to take care of ourselves and also our families. And so that includes everything under the individual needs that were mentioned, but in addition, needs around, for example, maintaining the family and even your immediate community, such as food preparation, consumption, child care, procreation, and home maintenance. Secondly, we need time and resources and the possibilities for contributing to society with our production of either goods and services. And this is really important in terms of having sustainable, meaningful labor at a living wage with reduced work hours. Reduced work hours is really the fulcrum of any vision, because if we don't have reduced work hours and a living wage, then we really don't have the time for the care work to take care of ourselves, take care of our family, or to participate in the other areas of a human need-fulfilling vision. In terms of production of goods and services, material goods, I think we all know what they are, and these services are the ones that have been identified by over 50 groups, that we all need healthcare, distribution and exchange, transportation, communication, administration, life protection, maintenance of the means of production, teaching, and cultural and ideological identity. A third area where everyone should have time to access is lifelong learning and access to information. And particularly important to Move to Amend, of course, is number 4, that we need informed, participatory decision-making at all levels. This is a real challenge because we need time not only for work at local government level, national, federal government level, but from every level of our lives, from the family to the workplace to the United Nations. We need to have the opportunity to participate and make meaningful decisions. And finally, we all need free time activity, or what Maslow called self-realization, like artistic, recreational, relaxing, reflecting, entertaining, volunteering, the time that is for ourselves to do what we would like to do. A few key points about a human needs-based vision based upon these human needs that have been identified by these 50 groups. First of all, we need to understand that we need to understand our true human needs, not our false human needs. For example, you can see what's not on the list. Trident missiles is not on the list. That was never identified by any of the 50 groups as a need, nor was insurance, nor prostitution, for example. Secondly, it's really important that we have the time, resources, and organization to participate in each one of these human need fulfilling activities. And I think it can be said, and this is the perspective anyway of Human Agenda, that participation in all 5 areas can lead to fulfilling, productive, caring, holistic, and happy lives for everyone. Finally, vision requires values, and institutions that are undemocratic, non-cooperative, unequal, non-diverse, hello? Yeah, my computer just went down.
Oh, shoot.
Is everybody else still up?
Yeah, we're still here.
Okay, so I will try to move on without my computer. A vision, as I was saying, requires values, and we cannot have institutions that are undemocratic, non-cooperative, unequal, non-diverse, unsustainable, and mean. And if so, they need fixing. So the next slide. What happens when economic, social, and political institutions don't support the needs of we the people? As we all know, we would have inadequate jobs with inadequate salaries, inadequate national health care policy, limited access to higher education, food insecurity, insufficient housing, inadequate environment regulations to save the planet, and punitive criminal justice systems, reproductive rights systems, and immigrant rights systems. Next. In order to maximize human potential and happiness, we need to create and sustain democratic, cooperative, egalitarian, inclusive, sustainable, and kind institutions that will meet everyone's needs. Now, when we reflect on these values and corporations, we have to ask the question, are corporations, especially our large multinational corporations, are they democratic? Are they cooperative? Are they egalitarian? Are they inclusive? Are they sustainable? Are they kind? And I think we have to conclude that no. It's also important when we talk about social and individual rights that we need to talk about social and individual responsibility. In fact, when Mahatma Gandhi was asked the question, what's more important, social rights or individual responsibility, he didn't hesitate to say that individual responsibility is the most important. So that meeting each one of our individual human needs requires our individual effort. For example, we can't build a democracy or democratic institutions unless we make the individual effort. We may have the most perfect healthcare system on our planet, but unless we actually take time and take the individual effort to have the right nutrition and exercise, we're not going to be healthy human beings. A good place to understand human rights is to review the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which of course was signed on December 10th, 1948. And even though the Declaration of Human Rights was adopted to define meaning of words such as fundamental freedoms and human rights, it really is not binding on all of the member states. Instead, many international lawyers argue that the Declaration forms part of customary international law. However, we have to say in third world countries, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a beacon of hope. Next. So these are the rights, and we won't spend a lot of time on them. If you're not familiar with the document, I highly recommend that you go to the document. There are 30 different sections of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You can read them, that we're all born free and equal, don't discriminate, the right to life, no slavery, no torture. You have rights no matter where you go. We're all equal before the law. Your human rights are protected by law. No unfair detainment, the right to trial. Next. Innocent until proven guilty, the right to privacy, freedom to move, the right to seek a safe place to live, the right to a nationality, marriage and family, the right to your own things, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, the right to public assembly. Next. The right to democracy, social security, workers' rights, the right to play, food and shelter for all, the right to education, copyright, a fair and free world, responsibility, and that no one can take away your human rights. Next. At the time of the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there were really two opposing views of human rights. The advanced Western countries, like the United States, wanted to include only civil and political rights, much as we have in our Bill of Rights. On the other hand, the Third World and the socialist countries wanted to include and, in fact, emphasize economic, social, and cultural rights, like the right to be able to have a job, education, and health care. There are two international covenants that are really important. First is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It was adopted in 1966 and went into effect in 1976. And it basically includes areas such as the right to life, freedom of religion, speech, assembly, electoral rights, and rights to due process and the fair trial. The United States did ratify this International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. However, really, it's been very diluted and has very little domestic impact at this point. Next. The other covenant is the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which was went into force on January 3rd, 1976. There are 153 countries that have ratified the treaty. The United States has not. And under the principle of progressive realization, these countries have committed to rights for workers, the rights to social security, family life, an adequate standard of living, health, free education, and participation in cultural life. Next. Barack Obama in 2001, in a radio interview in Chicago, talked about this, about what our Constitution incorporates. And he said, quote, generally the Constitution is a charter of negative liberties. It says what the states can't do to you. It says what the federal government can't do to you, but doesn't say what the federal government or state government must do on your behalf. So he is reiterating that basically the Constitution was set up to protect people to some extent from government, but was not an affirmative affirmation of human and civil rights. So what are constitutional rights? Constitutional rights are rights that are given or reserved to the people by the U.S. Constitution, and in particular, the Bill of Rights. These rights include the following: the writ of habeas corpus, no bill of attainder, no duties or tax on transporting goods from one state to another, jury trials, freedom of religion, speech and press, assembly and petition. Next. The state militia to bear arms, no quartering of troops in homes, no unreasonable search and seizure, major crimes requiring indictment, no double jeopardy, for the same crime, no self-incrimination, the right to due process, the right to just compensation for property taken by eminent domain. Next. In criminal law, the right to a speedy trial, to confront witnesses against one, and to counsel, the right to counsel, the right to trial by jury, the right to bail, no excessive fines, and no cruel and unusual punishments. And the unenumerated rights, this is extremely important, are reserved to the people. So everything that's not within the Constitution in terms of rights are explicitly reserved to the people. Also, equal protection of the laws, no racial bars to voting, the 15th Amendment, no gender bar to voting, and no poll tax. Next. So these rights were, as we mentioned, primarily in the area of civil and political rights, and at the same time, the founding fathers and framers were very clear that only human beings have inherently have rights. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it specifically says that inalienable rights only go to people. So in their mind, every institution created by humans have only privileges explicitly granted by government on behalf of we the people. And in their views, rights are human and inherent. Privileges are granted conditionally. When we talk about rights and privileges, one easy way to think about it is that rights are a type of entitlement. In my personal opinion, it's not an entitlement without responsibility. We should be entitled to certain rights that we don't have under the Constitution, but we also need to be responsible in order to have those rights attained. And also privilege can probably best be considered to be a license. So it's a temporary right, if you will, that can be taken away from you and that is granted by government for a period of time for a certain purpose. Next. From Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad all the way up to today, corporations have captured human protections and human rights, even though, as we know, corporate personhood was never passed by any legislature, the public never voted on it, and it was never stated by a decision after arguments before the Supreme Court. Also, from Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad from 1886 up to today, corporations have captured human protections and human rights as free speech, including the freedom to write laws and spend unlimited political money. Corporations also have the right to protection from searches, as if their belongings were personal, and also protections against double jeopardy and self-incrimination. Also, to due process and equal protection. This is only a short list of the rights that corporations have gained from our Supreme Court through the corporate personhood argument. So some of the questions I think that are important for us to discuss and get our juices flowing is, first of all, how do we prevent privileges from becoming rights, especially the privileges that are perhaps granted to corporations? Secondly, can we say that United States citizens have economic, social, and cultural human rights when they are not in the Constitution? Another question is if human rights are truly inherent, are they part of the natural order, according to Thomas Jefferson? Should they all be included in the Constitution? And fourth, should the form of economic, political, and social institutions, for example, like corporations or cooperatives, be placed in the Constitution? For example, in some countries, including Latin American countries, cooperatives are specifically constitutionalized, placed in the Constitution as an important vehicle for social change and social justice. If corporate incorporation is a privilege, which is what it was designed to be, how should corporations be controlled in a post-28th Amendment world? In Oakland, I moderated a group of dozens of people who came up with 32 different specific changes that should be made in the world after the 28th Amendment. And these are a few of them. First of all, national incorporation standards, a limited charter period, requiring a beneficial purpose for a corporation, for example, showing positive impacts on workers, community, and environment, getting rid of or limiting limited liability, and finding ways to make whatever economic institutions we have in our country more democratic, cooperative, equitable, inclusive, sustainable, and kind. And we have to ask what this would look like, especially in terms of ownership and control. Because as we know, the vast majority of Americans do not own or control a large corporation. So we can ask the question if banks and corporations really are the economic institutions of the future. And when we consider the message of Occupy Wall Street, we look at our banks and our corporations and we apply our values. Of course, we know that banks and corporations tend to be undemocratic, exploitative, patriarchal, discriminatory, unsustainable, and mean. Not the kind of institutions that we would really like to be operating with them. In fact, in a 2011 Gallup, Harris, and Rasmussen poll, it shows that between 2/3 and in some cases 90% of the public believe that corporations, banks, and lobbyists wield too much power. So when we talk about humanist vision, we have to recognize that in our daily lives, we really do spend the vast bulk of our time passively reproducing structures, institutions, and relationships that really don't have the values that we would like to see in our lives. However, with the solidarity economy based on human and global values, we need to increasingly capture spaces, for example, structures, institutions, and even our own personal behavior in society and in our individual lives that truly are democratic, cooperative, equitable, inclusive, sustainable, and loving or kind. We need to become the protagonists of change we want to see. In order to make and practice democracy, of course, we need to overturn Citizens United and end corporate personhood. We need to insist on democratic decision-making in our daily institutions that we engage in. And really, what is democracy if it's not participation? We need to jump in. As part of this on our daily lives, we need to be aware of how we spend our time. Through conscious living, we can become protagonists for change, to be the change we want to see and provide an alternative to existing society. Conscious living includes attempting to participate in the 5 areas of human need fulfilling activity. I think this is really critical because if we, in Move to Amend, cannot take the time to be caring to ourselves and to our families and to the people that we're working with, if we don't have time for participatory democracy or for education because we're working 60 hours a week, then we're really not going to be effective as change agents. Obviously, conscious living also includes conscious consumption. And last night at our Move to Amend discussion in Santa Clara County, we talked, for example, about the possibility at some point of a boycott of corporations who have gained privileges and rights under the Constitution. And finally, we need to work simultaneous on the level of structural change, institutional reform, and individual transformation. Every point we can, we need to make an attempt to change structures, but we also can't isolate ourselves from reform movements, and we certainly need to work on ourselves because each one of us is a case that needs to be improved, and we need to constantly be learning and thriving to improve ourselves personally. And I think that's it, Caitlin.
Teachers for laying that foundation for our discussion, and just to remind everybody that the intention was to begin to talk about this in this channel, there are other places where we're having this conversation, and I just want to kind of underscore really what Richard was talking about in terms of rights and privileges, and thinking about how what the Move to Amend amendment would do is put corporations and other artificial entities like unions or nonprofits in their place, so to speak, and then from there, the question of how they would be treated, what privileges those entities would be able to exercise or enjoy, would really be up to the democratic process through legislation. And so, there's no reason why we would need to treat, for example, nonprofits and for-profit corporations the same, or even small businesses that are locally owned and large multinational corporations the same. And the only reason why right now we have to kind of treat all those entities under the law equally is because of this idea that they have rights and are kind of out of bounds of the law in those ways. So I think that's really where the answer to the question is kind of that's up for us to just figure out. And I think that it's important for Move to Amend to have some ideas on that, so that when people are asking us, how it will be or what the ramifications really are, or what it means, we have some answers. But I also think that it's not up to us to come up with all the answers. Trying to put corporations back in their box doesn't mean that we also have to solve all the other problems with this amendment. That's not the intention. It's the first step. Steve, is there anything you want to add before we open it up to questions?
Well, first of all, great presentation, Richard. Thank you very much for that. I would have loved to have seen it out in Oakland Live. I bet it was even better, but it was very informative, and thank you. As far as what you were saying, Caitlin, it kind of echoes my thoughts as well. When I talk to people, especially in a mixed political crowd, I try to focus very narrowly on the goal of taking away from corporations the inalienable constitutional rights that they were never intended to have in the first place. And I leave all of the discussion for what will happen in a post-28th Amendment world to the democratic process that we will then have. Once we level the playing field, we can start to have meaningful debates with people of all political persuasions about what privileges we should give to for-profit corporations, as opposed to what privileges we should give to nonprofit corporations. You're absolutely right. There's nothing that says that those two very different corporate structures need to be treated identically under the law. But I really do stay away from those kinds of discussions when talking to a mixed group or kind of an introductory group of Move to Amend people, and just say those are the kinds of discussions that we'll have afterwards. First, we have to fix the problem. We have to level the playing field, because right now we can't even have those discussions because nobody's listening to me. Nobody's listening to the conservative I'm arguing with. The only voice that's getting heard in Washington or the State House or City Hall is the corporate money voice, and that's what needs to change.
Great. Okay, so if you have questions or comments, you can go ahead and chat or type them in at the bottom of the chat screen, which will be on the left side of your computer screen. And the first question that we have is from Amy in Santa Rosa, California, and she's asking, how will the Move to Amend amendment impact international human rights / corporate accountability cases in which corporations claim immunity because they are not people?
Let me think about that one for a second. If you have something, Richard, go ahead. Let me think about that for a second.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah, I know you're getting in your car. And the question is, how will the move to amend amendment impact international human rights / corporate accountability cases in which corporations claim immunity because they are not people? Are you still there, Richard?
I'm here. Because they're not what?
When corporations claim immunity because they are not people in international cases, kind of like the Chevron example and the Shell, will the move to amendment impact those situations, and if so, how? Or if not, why not?
This is Steve here. I don't think it will, because there is not going to be a vacuum after the fact. After the 28th Amendment is passed, first of all, corporations do have regulations and laws that govern their behavior now, and those laws would all be in place after the 28th Amendment, so nothing would change in that regard. And if corporations are skirting responsibility by claiming not people, then through the democratic process, we're going to have to tighten up our laws and regulations that deal with the situation that they have found a loophole for. Corporations will always look for loopholes. People will always look for loopholes. It's the purpose of the democratic process to plug those loopholes when they become apparent.
I think it indicates the importance of really working to develop a broad grassroots movement in the United States, because unless we have that movement in place after a 28th Amendment, we're not going to be able to get the statutory rights, either at the federal level, the state level, or even the local level, that really meet our human needs. We're going to need institutions that are reformed, either in terms of corporations or new institutions, in order to meet the needs of the American people.
Yeah, and I just want to add in, I see there's also a related question that I'll follow up with, but part of the problem is that, what you're getting to, Amy, is the limited liability of the individuals who are involved with corporations. That's the argument that is made to protect those people from crime and prosecution, which international law, might fall under. However, in part because of limited liability and this idea that corporations are a protection and protect the individuals involved, and they're a separate entity, which is kind of the corporate personhood, but kind of the nexus of limited liability comes in here too. I think part of the issue is that corporations right now have it both ways. They can be people when they want to be people, and they don't have to be people when they don't want to be people. And when we say corporations, it really is only the corporations that are wealthy enough to make these arguments in court, or to make these arguments to the WTO, or before international governments. And so that's really part of what we're trying to do with this amendment, is bring them back under control in this country. Richard, I think that there might be a lot of feedback on your line. So maybe when you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself, and you could press *6 to do that. I think that's your line. Okay. So I kind of lost my train of thought there, but the whole idea that property has rights and the protection of limited liability really, took off in this country, and now it's gone international with, these trade agreements, which codify the idea that corporations are people in many ways, or that property can sue governments, for example, for, future profits lost and all of that. And so we kind of need to unravel the ball of yarn where it started. And then from there, we need to make sure that that's not where we stop. And that's part of why Move to Amend is about these deeper issues of democracy and people power, and it doesn't just apply to the people that are American citizens in this country, but everywhere, to make sure that our institutions are not outside of the bounds of our control. And Paul from Brooklyn, New York, also said that it's related and wants to know if limited liability applies across borders.
Yeah, and no, it doesn't, Paul. Limited liability is a right granted by the state that is doing the incorporation. So to the extent that corporations need to be licensed in order to do business in other countries, those countries might have very different laws regarding corporate malfeasance and the ability to get at the corporate bad actors. That's why in India, for example, after the Bhopal tragedy, Union Carbide executives in India went to prison because of that ecological disaster, whereas here they tend not to. So no.
Well, but I would add to that actually, no, it doesn't have to be, but increasingly yes, because of trade agreements that our government enter into that basically agree that the rights, quote unquote, that corporations enjoy, for example, in this country, will be extended when they're doing business elsewhere. And the whole premise of, the international tribunals of the WTO also, really are the foundation of that is this idea that property is what corporate personhood is. And so I think you answered the question as a lawyer, Steve, but I also think the political reality is that it has been interpreted such that the idea that limited liability is like, by definition what a corporation is, and so is this personhood idea. And so, whatever you're talking about, that idea is going global and running roughshod over these laws that other countries had at one time. So let's see. Maggie from New York State says, I see this process as similar to the post-14th Amendment process. It took years to make the social changes needed, and we are not there with the new TRO. This is a process that requires a lot of tending. And it seems like that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to, as Move to Amend organizers, lay the groundwork for people being comfortable with talking about and not knowing all the answers to. And I think that, in particular in this country, with our Constitution being so difficult to amend, and the fact that, our quote-unquote democratic revolution was so many years ago, and now it's been enshrined as if it's still going on, and even that has, some very serious flaws in terms of how far it really went. There's this idea that, this is as good as it can be, and so the whole premise of discussing and debating these kinds of ideas of, how institutions should behave in society and what our rights are as human beings is something that really Americans are not used to. And that's a challenge that we have that is unique. That's one of the American exceptionalisms that we need to overcome. And I think that in a lot of ways we as Americans in general tend to believe that we don't actually really have a right to have those debates and those discussions. And the idea that we would embark on something that's not settled and that's not all figured out is kind of what people are used to and what people are taught to be comfortable with. And that's a reality that we're going to have to overcome. But I think given how bad things are and how many people it is now affecting and hitting close to home, I think more and more people are open to exploring the idea that stuff is so bad that it needs to change in a fundamental systemic way.
And if I could add, Caitlin, under the Constitution, the Founding Fathers certainly did leave the 9th and 10th Amendments. The 9th Amendment specifically stated that unenumerated rights in the Constitution are left to the people or to the states under the 10th Amendment. But what has happened due to the nature of our Supreme Court throughout history is that the Supreme Court has been extremely unwilling to allow any person to assert a right that is not specifically in the Constitution, which means that we specifically do not have rights, for example, around education and health care that many constitutions around the world do incorporate. About the only right that has been allowed is the right to privacy under the Griswold case, and that was used in Roe v. Wade. But we're stuck with a constitution where people have fought for rights, but the Constitution has not allowed them. For example, in the Rodriguez case, the Supreme Court ruled in Texas that education is not a right. And that has caused a lot of problems in terms of people being able to assert the rights that should be allowed under the Ninth Amendment. That have been denied by our Supreme Court.
And just to add in, since there aren't any more questions, and if folks do have additional questions or comments, please feel free to chat them, that I think, that part of our intention with Move to Amend, while yes, certainly the amendment, the 28th Amendment that is, written and on our website is our first priority, but the process of going about getting this amendment passed is one that we hope will poke these kinds of discussions and questions about how to further democratize our country, how to make democracy real. And as Richard's presentation outlines, there are some fundamental pieces like time and making sure that basic needs are met that really are part and parcel with making sure that a democracy is actually functioning and working. And if that's true, then those things should be codified in our Constitution, in our founding law, in the base level of our law, to ensure that not only our government doesn't infringe upon them, but that other entities or even other people don't as well. And so it's not like that's going to happen tomorrow, but we can go about doing this amendment building movement in a way that does provoke those questions, and in some ways that might be making it a little bit more challenging for ourselves in some ways, I think. But in a lot of ways, I think that opens up the door for making sure that this is actually real, because as Maggie pointed out, when slavery was ended, for example, it took not just one amendment, but 3 amendments to actually even make that change real. And there was a war fought over that. And so I think we need to not be naive and think that just because we have a couple paragraphs of text that go into the Constitution, that's somehow going to mean that we have equality for all or something. That's only going to happen if there's a political movement and a social movement that is willing to make sure that that's what the amendment does. And that movement needs to be wholly conscious of all the ways that our current system is really denying us our true potential as a country and as people, and and the ramifications that has on the rest of the world. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions or comments. Oh wait, spoke too soon. Anthony from Kansas asked, can you compare and contrast the amendment Move to Amend proposes to the others that are currently circulating? Do you all want me to do that, or do either of you want to do that? One thing, just to let you know, Anthony, there is a document on the Move to Amend website that you can find if you go to movetoamend.org, and then in the top menu bar, there's a section called Amendments, and if you hover over that, you'll see Amendment Comparison, and that's actually where we lay out the different proposals that have been put forth and what they would do and what they will not do. And if you want, I can just quickly run through that, Steve or Richard, unless you all want to, either one of you want to do it.
Caitlin.
Okay, I've got it right in front of me. So the Bernie Sanders amendment, and which is in the Senate, and the Deutsch amendment, which is the same language in the House, Ted Deutsch, are basically similar to the Move to Amend amendment, but there is one real fundamental difference that we feel is actually critical. What that amendment language says is that for-profit and business corporations are not people, do not have the rights of people. It gives Congress the authority to regulate corporations, but that part of the amendment is unclear whether it's specific to for-profit and business corporations only, or whether it's talking about all artificial entities. It overturns Citizens United in part in that it prohibits for-profit corporations and entities that are serving business interests from making political contributions. And it also does give Congress the authority to regulate campaign contributions and also to institute disclosure requirements. What it doesn't do is the personhood section only addresses for-profit corporations and business corporations. It does not address not-for-profit corporations like PAC or Citizens United, which was a 501c4, is a 501c4 nonprofit corporation. And it also doesn't address unions. So it implies by omission that those entities may claim personhood rights, but it's not explicit, it's vague, and we would consider that to be a huge loophole and potential, as we've said sometimes, but for a loophole so big that you could drive a truck through it, in that it wouldn't apply to Citizens United. And it's also unclear whether the subsequent sections, the parts about regulation, apply to for-profit or nonprofit. Sanders talks about it as if it does, but honestly, I'm not sure that it's as clear as he presents it. And then the Udall amendment proposal, which is introduced by Tom Udall and is also co-signed by a number of different folks in Congress, reverses the Citizens United decision. So it basically would take us back to 2010 in that it affirms the power of Congress of the states to regulate campaign contributions. And it also challenges the Buckley decision, which is the decision where the court said that money is free speech, because it gives Congress authority to regulate campaign spending and political contributions. So it kind of explicitly is implied that, well, if government has the authority to regulate campaign spending and political contributions, then maybe money is not free speech, but it does not explicitly say money is not speech. And it doesn't address corporate constitutional rights at all. And then the last one that is actually viable, there are a few others and they're listed on the site, but the other kind of viable one that is often cited is the McGovern Amendment, introduced by Jim McGovern, who's a Massachusetts senator or congressperson, and it asserts that corporations are not people. But it does not address the Supreme Court doctrine of money is free speech. And so it leaves the door open for wealthy individuals to continue to bankroll elections, and it doesn't explicitly give Congress authority to limit or ban campaign contributions, and it doesn't address the money is speech really at all. And then the Move to Amend amendment, just in case anybody doesn't already know this, and the whole amendment is available on our website at movetoamend.org/amendments, but it's explicitly written to both say that corporations and all corporate official entities, which would include unions and nonprofits and limited liability companies and any other entity that is created by government, do not have rights as people. Only persons have constitutional rights, and money is not speech, and therefore government at all levels can regulate campaign spending or even ban it, and also institute disclosure requirements. So, and there's also, as Paul in Brooklyn, New York points out, if you go to amendmentgazette.com, there's further analysis of the amendments that have been proposed as well. Let me just look back and make sure there's no questions that I missed. Nope, it looks like that's it, unless there's anybody else who has any. Before folks jump off, there is a survey. It's very quick, just an evaluation at the end, and if you wouldn't mind just it takes like 2 minutes to give us your feedback if you have any suggestions for future topics or anything that we didn't cover tonight that you'd like to see, or just any feedback. And if you're not part of a Move to Amend group, definitely encourage you to consider getting one started. You can start one yourself, or if you want to touch base with us, if you're not sure if there's a group in your area, we can try and connect you to whoever's closest. And there's a lot of information at movetoamend.org about how to get started with a group, or what the purpose of the local affiliates are, how they work, and all of that. And Steve or Richard, do either of you want to give any closing comments? Maybe both of you, Steve first.
No, thank you. I thought it was a very good webinar. webinar, and thank Richard again, and thank you everybody for the good questions, and talk to you next time around.
Great. Richard?
Yeah, I wanted to thank everyone for participating today. I think the discussion is about the future of the United States, the future of our children, the future of our planet, and we do need to begin the dialogue of the kind of world we would like to live in. At the same time, we have a very specific challenge before us, and that is to pass the 28th Amendment on the road to that better world.
Great. And just so everyone knows, these webinars are always monthly. The next one will be on the 4th of September at the same time. And we don't have a topic nailed down yet, but my hope is that we're actually going to hear from another person in Richard's group in Santa Clara County who's going to talk about a door-to-door campaign that they're doing in their community to elicit input and feedback and recruit new people to their group and broaden their membership. And so if we don't do that in September, we will be doing it soon after, but my hope is that'll be our next webinar on September 4th, and you can always find the topics online at movetoamend.org/webinars. So thanks everyone, and as soon as I hit to end this meeting, you'll be taken to the survey, so if you just hold on for just